Here's our vehicle battery that we're going to be inspecting and taking a look at and servicing today to make sure it's up to snuff for the season. So the first inspection that we usually do when we pop the hood of a vehicle is we're going to look for this kind of corrosion, this white stuff here. That's battery, that's corrosion buildup from the battery gases escaping from these caps or around the terminals, and they're coming up, they're mixing with dirt, they're mixing with air, and the oxygen, it forms this corrosion, which corrosion is resistance, and we don't want resistance in any of our electrical circuits. So just by that visual inspection, I know that this battery needs to be serviced. If we didn't see that corrosion, or even another step two would be to just make sure that these clamps that are tight onto the post. Sometimes with the all lead battery clamp, the lead stretches, and sometimes it just can't get a good enough contact with the post. But that's ultimately needs to happen, is those clamps need to be really gripping and making good contact with the posts. A third inspection is going to be looking at the battery top. I like to look at it, since it has these maintenance caps, the battery is always kind of venting and gassing, and there's always a little bit of gas that comes up between the lead post and the plastic case. But the dirty, wet top, a lot of times, most people really don't care about it too much, but it's a pretty important factor to kind of take a look at. I want you to look at this. I'm going to pull my meter up here and my leads and put it on the voltage scale, and I'm going to look at battery voltage. So battery voltage is 12.17, which is pretty low considering it's not fully charged. A fully charged battery would be 12.6. But if I were to look at just the battery top, look at this. If I take my negative and put it over here on the plastic top, and I take the positive over here, I'm drawing a half of a volt just across the top of the battery because of the film of corrosion that's starting on the top of the battery. So that's a constant drain on the battery. It's like leaving your flashlight on really, really dim for a long period of time, so it can eventually drain the battery. So that could be why I'm seeing this low battery voltage. So we definitely want to clean that top, and I'll show you how to do all that stuff soon enough. We also want to make sure that the battery is secured to the vehicle. I hate to say it, but we don't want to see any bungee cords, because that bungee can degrade over time because of the gassing of the battery and the acids. So a loose battery is set up for problems, failure, damage to your electrical system, shorting out on the hood, falling out, and ultimately shaking and rattling all the plates inside, and it can degrade. It can lessen the life of the battery. So make sure it's secure, and if not, you can pick up an inexpensive hold down for your battery. Make sure the battery doesn't have any leaks. Just kind of take a look around it, make sure there isn't any standing liquid on the sides, because most of these batteries are filled with an acid, and it can eat into wiring harnesses, and it can start rusting some metal components or corroding it. And boy, if we're losing some battery acid somewhere, it means that one of the cells isn't completely contributing to the overall current total of the battery. So that usually requires replacement. I'm going to start off by cleaning this terminal off a little bit so I can get at that nut, so I can take those clamps off. And what I usually use, and what probably everybody uses on batteries to clean them up, is a baking soda and water solution. And it doesn't take a lot of baking soda, and I usually just fill up a solo cup of water and add a tablespoon or two of baking soda. And then if I have an acid brush, great, but this is what I could rustle up today. I found a paintbrush. And what this will do is it'll neutralize that corrosion. Get it out of there so I can get a wrench on it to pull it off. You might want to put a drain pan underneath the car, because as this gets washed away, it'll actually fall on the pavement, and it'll, even though it's neutralized acid, it usually leaves a big white stain and mark in there. So sometimes I put an oil pan, drain pan underneath there to catch all that stuff. We take all this stuff apart. You always start with the negative side of the battery first, and usually you'd kind of look around and make sure that you see a plus or a minus here. I don't see a plus or a minus, but I do notice that this black cable goes down to the fender, and it's bolted there, so I know that that's the negative side. So I'm going to pull that negative off first. We always make or break that battery circuit with the negative. So that's one. I need to be careful. I don't want to run the risk of shorting these two out. We'll be doing some arc welding. Okay, that's loose. We'll see if we can get this loose. There we go. Oh, that's full of corrosion in there. Okay. Move off to the side somewhere. And then we can take, nice, and maybe take our battery top off, case. And then we can either pull this battery out and service it on the ground, or actually in a pan, but we're gonna keep it in here. Now that everything's out in the open, we could see everything. We're just gonna leave it in. I'm gonna finish my battery top service here. My baking soda and water solution. Now this positive cable was pretty nasty. Right here, pretty nasty. So I think what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna try and pop this piece off. Seeing as I got a nice connection right here, we'll see if I can actually pop this cable clamp off and really get that thing cleaned up. There we go. We'll clean it up and see if it's still usable. Nasty stuff. Here's my nasty thing. And there you can see it starting to foam away, getting all that nasty stuff off the cable end. Now meanwhile, I'll finish up the top of the battery again. So once we get this all cleaned up, I'm going to dry them, and then we're going to take care of this contact, the surface of that lead. I like to dry the batteries off first before messing with the posts. And most of the time I'll use some compressed air. But that can make a mess too if you're not careful, because you'll be blowing all this stuff around. Okay. So you see how that post is still kind of nasty. We want it nice and shiny, so we use a battery post brush. A couple different versions of it. Pretty common battery brush right here. You got the post cleaner here, and then you have a scratchy brush for the cable ends. And that's one style. It's probably the most popular. It's the one you see most of the time. And I've got one of these, same kind of thing right here, battery post brush, but on the inside we've got something that actually scrapes the lead in the cable end on the lead based ones. And you can see how you should be able to see how it's tapered there, because the cable ends are a tapered fit, and if you look at the posts closely, the posts are a tapered fit. So when we put the cable end on there, it kind of wedge fits itself on there. So we'll get started on cleaning these up. That's kind of how you want them, is nice and shiny like that. Now some of these brushes, this one's small enough to fit both cable ends, but a brush like this might be positive, turning it in one direction, and on the negative you turn it in the other direction. Sometimes they're like that. But you want to make sure the whole surface is shiny. The whole surface is going to contact the cable end. That's looking pretty good. I like it. That looks pretty good. So anything that you see that's blue or white or anything in there, that all has to come off. We can't afford to really leave any of it, if at all possible, because what that does is it just allows a good starting place for fresh corrosion to start building. So, man, use a little brush if you have it. You can use, sometimes I'll use a big brush to get at stuff. Sometimes I'll look at it and go, oh, I can't get at that stuff in that little corner, that little crevice, so I soak this thing in the baking soda and water solution. But this is coming out pretty good. I'm getting all the rust off of there too. Let's get the inside of it. These brushes get worn out pretty quick, so they're inexpensive to use or to buy. So, but it's a tool that you don't want to not have in your toolbox to do this. So I'm going to kind of wipe it off just to check to make sure that it looking okay. It's nice and shiny in there. That's what I want. It's nice and shiny. And again, if it were that lead post, you want to take that and put it in there and clean it up. But the bigger you make the hole, the less chance of it's able to grip onto that post. Nasty stuff from our positive battery cable, so we'll pull it out. Cable end after I pulled out, still see a lot of green stuff. I'm going to try and pull this piece of plastic off, and you can see that, boy, it's held on there by the bolt and the nut, the hold down bolt and nut. So I'm going to pull that black piece off and see what happens. You still see a whole bunch of corrosion, and even in the bolt that needed a little bit of finesse or work. You know, if it's too much. If it's too much and you see that some of this metal is worn away, maybe it's time to go get a new cable and fix it that way. But I like to use the factory stuff, the OEM stuff that came on it, so we're going to see if we can't make this one work. After inspection here, I got it all cleaned up. I was going to reuse it, but I took a closer look at it and I find this. See how that's broke right there? That's not going to be able to tighten that bottom clamp down, that bottom contact surface. And notice that there really isn't a lot of contact surface that's going to contact the post on here. I think it needed everything it can get, so I'm going to replace this thing, even after putting in all that work. Recommend too, when doing a battery service, are these putting on these little felt washers that you can get. You usually put the red on the positive, and then the green on the negative. And what those do is they seal that little space between the lead post and the plastic top, so it kind of cuts down on some corrosion. Battery shield. There we go. And when you put these cable clamps on, you want to make sure that the top of the post is either flush or sticks out of here to get maximum contact. So with that washer and this fancy hold down, and you only tighten it until it's tight, until you can't move it anymore. You don't want to over tighten. Especially with the lead clamps, where the cable end isn't below the post. So we're going to clean this up a little bit, or pull it off. And this is an all lead cable end. It looks like it's a molded integrated cable, so you can't separate those. So if you needed to replace this piece, you'd have to cut and whatever. So there's also tools like this out there. That's a cable end spreader, and I'll be able to put that in there and actually kind of spread that out like this. And what that allows me to do is put that on there further down onto the post. Tighten it up. Tighten it only until it stops turning. You don't want to over tighten because this lead will stretch. There we go. So that one's good to go. It's pretty good. It's as far as I could get it down onto the post. Got our cable clamps in, they're nice and tight. And the top is clean, dry, all the good connections. Put these felt washers in to prevent the corrosion from coming up between. I also like to put on a little bit of a protectant spray on them. This is also an anti-corrosive. It doesn't dry, it kind of stays on there. It is when you're done that these cables should be nice and tight. Well, you shouldn't be able to move them at all on the posts. So that seems okay. Hey, when you start this thing up, usually I like to do that too. Make sure it starts about 5 times in a row very easily, and just let you know that, hey, this is a fuel injected vehicle, which means we probably lost some power to some of the computers, and that the computers kind of have to relearn how to drive. So, I mean, it'll start up and run, and it'll get you from point A to point B, but you might feel some goofy drivability problems, like maybe a rough idle, maybe a stall at a stop, but everything should be relearned and ready to go probably within 5 to 10 miles of driving. So just kind of know that when we remove the battery power from all the computers, there's some capacitors in there that hold some charges and memories and stuff, but sometimes things have to get relearned. Okay. Last thing before we're done is make sure you clean your tools up. Anywhere that there's corrosion on there, even the fancy tools, the Snap-on and the Craftsman stuff, that corrosion can get in there and it can start eating the chrome. It can start eating pliers and etc. So make sure you clean your tools up good before you put them away. It just they last longer. That's about all I got. Well, good luck.